Hello, everybody. So good morning. Happy New Year and welcome to the Built Heritage Committee meeting of January 16th, 2024. I'd like to call the members to order. This hybrid meeting is being facilitated through Zoom and is being held on the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation, the original custodians of the unceded land in which the City of Ottawa is located. We extend our respect to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people for their valuable past and present contributions to this land. Since this committee meeting is being streamed live on the Ottawa City Council YouTube channel, I'd like to remind participants to please keep your microphones muted until I call upon you to speak. For those participating here in the committee room, please use the microphone in front of you and keep your computer muted. I will provide each committee member with the opportunity to ask questions or comment on each item in the order in which they raised their hand in Zoom. For panelists, the raised hand option is found at the bottom of the participants list. For those calling in, press *9 to raise your hand. The committee coordinator and I will be watching for those cues. Members are also reminded to submit any motions, visual supports, or declarations of interest in writing to the coordinator at their earliest opportunity. Although the deadlines have passed for residents to register to speak and provide written submissions to this committee, you can still make written submissions to council. If you have technical difficulties signing into the meeting, you can contact the committee coordinator by calling 613-580-2424 extension 22953. A reminder that if participants are having technical difficulties with their Zoom connection, they may call in using the backup telephone number provided by the coordinator. For this meeting today, I have received no regrets. Before we proceed, I'll ask the committee coordinator to do a roll call of all members.
Councillor Kelly.
Present.
Member Doherty.
Present.
Member Quinn.
Present.
Councillor Troster.
Here.
Member Madigan.
Here.
Councillor Leeper.
Good morning.
Member Legault.
Present.
Vice Chair Plant. I see you, Vice Chair, and Chair King.
Here.
You have quorum, Chair.
Well, thank you so much. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, are the minutes of November 6, 2023 confirmed?
Confirmed.
So much. So I'll run through a consent agenda to determine which items will be held today. Our first item is an application to alter 359 Kent Street, 436 and 444 McLaren Street, properties designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act as part of the Centertown Heritage Conservation District. There is a technical amendment, which I will ask Councillor Troster to.
Thank you so much, Chair. Whereas report recommendation 3 states that Built Heritage Committee and Planning and Housing Committee recommend that council, quote, approve the issuance of a heritage permit with a 4-year expiry date from the date of issuance unless otherwise extended by council. And whereas the applicant has requested an extension of the heritage permit, therefore be it resolved that recommendation 3 be amended to the following. Approve the issuance of a heritage permit with an expiry date of 2 years from the date of the required site plan agreement approval, but no later than 7 years from the date of issuance unless otherwise extended by council. Thank you.
Thank you so much for reading that in. Staff has created a presentation if needed. We did receive correspondence on this item from David Fleming from Heritage Ottawa. We do have speakers who are registered primarily from the applicant team and also from Heritage Ottawa. Heritage Ottawa is only registered to speak if needed. Do members want this item held? I don't see.
Yeah, I guess there are a couple of things I would like to discuss.
Okay, so then we will undertake a presentation for this item. The next item on the agenda is an application to alter 29 Russell Avenue, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act located in the Russell Avenue Range Road Heritage Conservation District. There is also a technical amendment for this item, which I will ask Vice Chair Plotz to introduce.
Can you hear me? Yeah, perfect. Okay. Whereas report recommendation 1 erroneous, and I apologize for the noise in the background, erroneously states that the plans prepared by Woodman Architect and Associates is dated 26 July 2023 in both English and French report recommendations. And whereas the plans referenced in supporting document 6 evaluations were dated 28th of July 2023, therefore be it resolved that the report recommendation 1 in both English and French be amended to state that the plans prepared by Woodman Architect and Associates is dated 28 July 2023, 28 juillet 2023.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair. Staff has devised a presentation if needed. We also did receive correspondence from a resident as well as Heritage Ottawa. And the speakers that are registered are from the application team. Heritage Ottawa is here to provide comment only if needed. So do members want this item held? I don't see any hands. So if the committee is prepared to carry this item, does anybody from the application team, the applicant team, or Heritage Ottawa needs to speak? Applicants being promoted to answer that question.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. No, we do not. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So is the technical amendment carried? Carried, thank you. And is the motion carried as amended? Thank you. This report will be submitted to the Planning and Housing Committee tomorrow, January 17th for consideration.
Councillor King, sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to register a dissent on it. That's all.
Yes, and
Thank you.
with the will of committee, we'll register that dissent. The next item is application to alter 125 Lakeway Drive, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act located in the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District. There are delegations, so this item will be held. The next item is application to alter 149 King George Street, a property designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There is a presentation only if needed. There was correspondence submitted to the clerk's office from the Overbrook Community Association, Heritage Ottawa, and other residents and parents of the Mincy School. There are registered speakers, but only registered if needed to speak. There's also Peter Hugh, who's registered on behalf of the applicant. I just want to note that on this item, my office did hold a information session for residents last week, Monday, January 8th, where we outlined some of the differences between what the Heritage Committee looks at and regulates, adjudicates, and what the Committee of Adjustment looks at in terms of planning items. So there was a lot of clarity that was provided to residents about the differences in terms of the responsibilities of both bodies. Do members want this item held?
Yes, please.
So I see Member Quinn wants the item held, so we will return to that item. The next item is an update to the designation of Waterworks Complex under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There is a motion to defer this item before us, which I will ask Vice Chair Plant to move. And I don't know if Vice Chair Plant is still on the call with us. The item is before us to be moved.
Chair, the vice chair may be having audio issues. If another member could move the deferral motion, that would be fine. Sure. Happy to do it. Just get it short. Okay. Whereas subsequent to report publication, internal stakeholder considerations have been raised that require further discussion. Therefore, be it resolved that the Built Heritage Committee approve the following. 1, defer report ACS 2024-PRE-RHU-0017 to the February 13th, 2024 meeting of the Built Heritage Committee, and permit staff to include a revised staff report and supporting documentation for inclusion in the distribution of the February 13th, 2024 Built Heritage Committee agenda with notice being provided.
Well, thank you so much. I see that Vice Chair Plant has raised her hand.
No, I just wanted to thank Councillor Truster. I had some tech issues because I was trying to find a quieter spot. So thank you so much. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, is the motion to defer carried?
Carried.
Carried. Thank you so much. The next item is designation of Bible House at 315 Lisgar Street. That item is, oh, sorry. Yep, sorry. Sorry, the next item is designation of 415 Kenwood Avenue under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. That item is held for delegations. The next item is designation of Bible House, which is also held for designations, held for deputations and delegations. The next item is designation of Southminster United Church at 1040 Bank Street, which is also held for delegations. The following item is designation of the former W.C. Edwards and Company building, which will also be held for delegation. Following that, designation of the Westboro Masonic Temple, which is also held for delegations. So we will return back to our first item. Which is 4.1. Can we receive a presentation on 359 Kent Street, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning, Chair. As a member of the committee, I'll just wait until the presentation comes up. So this application has been in front of the committee actually twice before, once in June 2022 and once in April 2023. The planning application and heritage permit were both considered and carried at the November 15th Planning and Housing Committee meeting. Next slide, please. Oh, they might be slightly out of sync. Thanks. So the existing conditions, just the properties are located in Centertown. There's some photos of the building on that site. The heritage context for the site, there are 3 designated buildings, all designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Next slide. There's the buildings at 436 and 444 McLaren, which were both constructed circa 1900 in the Queen Anne and Georgian Revival style respectively. And then there's 359 Kent, which was constructed in 2 phases between 1956 and 1958. It was the headquarters for the Royal Canadian Legion's Dominion Command, and it was built by architect J.L. Kingston. Next slide. The proposal that's in front of you today is a landmark building, according to the policies in the Central and East Downtown Core Secondary Plan. It's a 27-story building with a 5- and 4-story podium. There's 289 dwelling units proposed with 4 stories of underground parking. There's institutional and community uses proposed on the ground floor of the podium and at 436 McLaren Street. It also includes the reconstruction and retention of the heritage buildings on the second floor. Next slide. The Legion House at 359 Kent will be dismantled and reconstructed on the same footprint. The south and west facades will be reconstructed using existing material, where the east and north facade will be reinterpreted using new material with a contemporary and compatible design. Next slide. The 2 buildings at 436 and 444 McLaren Street will be retained and restored, and they'll be incorporated into the overall development through a privately owned public space and the landscape design of the site. So the landscape plan is on the screen there, and you can see the proposed plantings in that POPs and along Gilmore Street. Next slide. Heritage staff are recommending approval of the application today, and the key rationale for our approval are that the proposal retains the heritage buildings on McLaren in their entirety. It uses the reconstructed Legion building as the podium for the high rise, and it makes it a focal point of the development. It's set back, the height of the new building is set back from the facade of the Legion building, and it establishes a 4-story red brick podium to transition to the residential streetscape where there's currently a parking lot. So next slide, please. Our approval has several conditions associated with it. There's the approval is conditional upon the approval of the Associated Planning Act applications, the providing financial securities, submission of final elevations of the tower portion for approval under delegated authority, implementation of the conservation measures in the conservation plan, providing samples of all final exterior materials, and then finally a documentation and salvage plan. Next slide. And that is it for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that in-depth presentation. We now move to registered speakers. The applicant team is registered. Morning. Presentation ready. And I think staff is just pulling it up. Thank you so much. You have 5 minutes. Please proceed.
Good morning, members. My name is Derek.
As we've already heard before, this project has been heard at the Planning and Housing Committee in November of 2023. And so now we're here for the subsequent step of attending the BHC committee meeting with respect to addressing and presenting our heritage intervention strategy with respect to Legion House. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, John Stewart, who is on the call. And I also have my colleague, Kyle Kazda from Tiger Realty, as well as Patrick Bisson from Hoban Architecture. So I'll turn it over to John, if you're there. And next slide, please.
Next slide, please. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm everybody hear me?
Yep.
Great. I think Anne has pretty well covered the and has done a nice job of discussing the three buildings. They're all designated under Part 5. The 2 on McLaren are single family residential buildings. They will be retained and integrated into the development. The Legion House, which is the peachy colored, is mid-century modern, and the facade of it will be dismantled. It's a very, very fine quality limestone, smooth surface limestone cladding, and it will be piece by piece removed and reintegrated to create the podium. In terms of the context, the retention of the 2 buildings on McLaren are important in maintaining that streetscape, and the retention of the Legion House in terms of public realm is an extremely creates an extremely comfortable integration with the new development. Next slide, please. I think Anne has touched on these. The primary features are the limestone, the horizontal windows, the use of aluminum as trim detail, and the accent windows on the corner. Next slide, please. The 2 residential buildings, in both cases, they're good quality buildings. They're typical of the area, and they'll become effectively they become part of a continuation and preservation of an important streetscape. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Chuck.
Margaret?
So the key design shapers to the development were obviously the retention of the heritage assets on site, and primarily the Legion House presented a great opportunity for us to integrate a pretty valuable piece of heritage architecture. The site and context was also a very important aspect of the development, understanding how this development would impact Kent Street, and integrating a sort of a privately owned public spaces, a contributing asset to the community, and understanding the neighborhood, its scale, its materiality, and the texture it creates along all streets. And the last component was the tower design, and not understanding it through a sustainable lens, looking at it as a next generation building, and really creating a sense of place on site, and looking how it would affect the city skyline in a positive manner. Next slide, please. So this is again the view of the proposed development. The retention of the Legion House really serves as a pedestal to sit a subtle, quiet tower on it, but really focusing the attention on the Legion House and its existing presence on site. Next slide, please. And so the retention and the rebuilding of the Legion House really creates a positive image on site, and anchors the building on site. It reduces embodied carbon impact through the repurposing of the materials, and retains the two key feature elevations of the building. Next slide, please. So we retain the two elevations almost 100% as they are today, with a few minor alterations, and this being the alterations of the apertures at street level. These allow us the opportunity to bring more natural light into the ground level, creates a better relationship at street level for the pedestrians, and also creates opportunities to enter the building. Next slide, please. So in terms of the scope of work for the conservation work, basically we will be documenting both of the retained elevations, deconstructing them, cataloging, and reconstructing them with a new efficient building skin in the future. Next slide, please. And we did discuss the transitional element. It serves two purposes. One is one of scale, and the other one is materiality and architectural language. So it really serves to transition down to the lower level fabric, but also creates a moment where you can transition the various architectural languages that one finds in the neighborhood. Next slide. Here we see a view along Kent Street, the integration of the existing building and the development, along with the landscape treatment that really helps to tie everything together with the two existing houses on McLaren, public green space, and then the new tower development. Next slide. Again, just a closer view of how that pop space interacts with the podium and the ground level of the proposed development. Next slide. And then the two houses along McLaren really serve sort of as an extension of the podium. Obviously, they're not connected, but through the green space, through the two houses, everything sort of ties itself together and brings a really different, lively edge to Kent Street, Gilmore, and McLaren. Next slide, please. That is all we have. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate the presentation. Are there any questions for the applicant team? And I see that I think that member Madigan raised his hand first.
I didn't use. Oh, that's very kind of you. Sorry, I didn't use the raise hand function. I was just wondering, because I know that we've had some conversations between Tiger and my office about potential community use for the podium and also for the heritage buildings on site. And I'm wondering if you could just speak to that a little bit about what your commitment is to community use, because that is something that's a key part of the landmark building policy.
Sure, no problem. I'd be happy to speak to that. So as the council mentioned, the The zoning provisions with respect to the building at 436, 444, and 359 contemplate a civic use component. So currently we're planning for two distinct civic use spaces, one which is in 436 McLaren, which is the home on the east side of the property, so further in from Kent Street, and then on the northwest corner of the new Heritage Building at 359 Kent Street, we've allocated several thousand feet for another civic use space within there. So what we've committed to at the present time is to work with the councilor's office, local community organization, and any city organization that may be looking for civic use type space, such as office space, community space, gathering space, to essentially provide this space to these organizations. So I think one thing that's been really great out of this process is we've committed to working with the council's office to finding the right organizations that will benefit from being located in Centertown. So I hope that answers your question.
No, that's great. And I really appreciate how open you've been to that. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Madigan.
Good day. Really appreciate your presentation and the design. I think there's balance between objectives for the project, between conservation and development and other goals. No one gets 100% what they want. A small sort of question. There's the intent to salvage the limestone facade and reinstate it. At the base of the limestone facade, it starts with a granite plinth, which is a traditional detail for durability and also part of the aesthetic of the building. Maybe I'm misinterpreting the renders. Is the intent to include the granite at the base?
I can answer that. Yes, the intention is to retain it. The granite also to where possible to retain the sill plate. Some of the sills are in poor condition, but we think we can retain enough to over the overall building to also retain those. So it's really the cladding, the fabric, things like the aluminum trim. I don't think it'll be retained, but and the cornice detail has been replaced, so it'll be a new piece as well.
That's good to hear that. It's also a sustainable thing. That's the granite is more durable over time than the Queensland limestone. Thank you.
True. Especially the amount of salt being used.
Thank you, Member Legault.
Hi. I think it's a really beautiful project. Congratulations. From a standards and guidelines point of view, the primary treatment here is really rehabilitation. So as you all probably know, with the secondary treatment of that limestone cladding of restoration. So those other elevations, not the southwest that you guys are restoring, should be distinguishable from and subordinate to that southwest elevation. And then I just would like to note, I'm getting a bit of feedback. I would just like to note the importance of that documentation and salvage plan to the city of Ottawa. I'm not sure what the plan is, if it's a LiDAR scan. I did know that you will be marking every piece. But right now you're at 100%, right? 100%, and that's 100%, assuming that 100% of the materials is salvageable. But surely it's not going to be that case when you get to site. So maybe you're at 70 or 60%, and that should be considered. If it gets down to 50%, maybe you salvage sections of the elevation rather than having sort of a patchwork throughout. But overall, this whole intervention should be considered rehabilitation. So standard 11 should be the driving force, and then specifically for that limestone cladding, it should be a restoration project. So everything else should be clearly up 2024. And so you don't want it to look like everything was original on those other two elevations, because that would be a false sense of historical development. But otherwise, it's wonderful. Yeah.
I think one thing to note, if I could just speak to, testing. So I think one thing just to note is I think that's a bit annoying. I apologize.
Staff's working to resolve the technical issues with the microphones right now. Test 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Chair, would it be possible to have a 5-minute recess while we seek to resolve this issue?
Absolutely. We'll be in recess for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Final test for the live stream. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3. One, two, three. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. Testing for the live stream. Sound quality test. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. One, two, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So my understanding is that the technical issues have been resolved. But we will give it 1 minute because I know that you wanted to respond to Member Legault and she stepped away. So we'll resume when a few more members join us at the table. For the technical difficulties, I think that they've been corrected, so we can resume. I know question comments from the applicant team. So so thank you. I will I'll take a moment right now to answer some of your questions there. So, from some of the street views is that this building is currently a story below grade. There's actually some stairs walking down, so we have worked with the city staff to redesign the ground floor plane with respect to the glazing and fenestration on the west and the south elevation. And that regard, we should have some more stone and some more material available for it, because we will be eliminating one course between the below grade window and the first story, because right now we're showing about 1.5 stories worth of glazing there. But your point's well taken, is that we don't want to have a patchwork approach with respect to the integration, and we'll start at the datum point at the southwest corner, and we'll work in a north and an easterly direction. But a lot of this will be predicated on the quality of the stone as it's removed from the building. Currently, we've done some destructive testing on one area of the building, and the stone appears to be in very good condition. So. Thank you for that. Thank you so much. The name waiver is.
Sorry, Chair. I'm not sure those technical issues have been resolved. I'm having a very hard time hearing anybody speak. It's very broken.
Thank you. Yes, we will have. As I'm speaking.
All I heard was you say speaking. That's the one word I heard out of all that.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, what is the situation for Member Quinn? Can Member Quinn hear us?
I can hear what you just said completely. Otherwise, a little broken up. But that what you just said came through no problem. I think I'm having more success in my than my colleague.
Okay. And this might be unorthodox, but I know that there is also a way to dial in. So I don't know, Member Kelly, if you'd like to dial in, maintain your computer connection, but be able to hear the discussion. I'm just cognizant of the fact that you know, we don't want to waste everybody's day trying to fix technical issues this morning.
Okay, I'll dial in.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And we do have Heritage Ottawa here before us to provide a delegation. Hunter, thank you.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to this particular item. To begin with, we would like to express our appreciation to the developer, to the proponent, for the careful and thoughtful approach that they've taken to consultation with interest groups, with community representatives and so on. That's much appreciated. The other point that I'd like to make as well, and it has to do with the proposed design, and that is the intention to preserve the two heritage buildings on McLaren Street, the really commendable efforts to preserve the Legion building itself. And we recognize from the consultations we've been able to take part in that that's not been an easy task from a design and also an engineering standpoint. So good points to the developer for taking those extra steps. It is a distinctive building in Centertown, and well worth, we think, the efforts to preserve it. Also, the issue of what I keep calling POPA, but I think the proper term is POPs, privately owned, publicly accessible space, is, I think, a very, very interesting step. And we hope that as other sites in Centertown and within the city, it's as well, receive the same kind of consideration to enhance and enlarge the amount of POPs that are available for citizens. Okay, so that's the good news, as it were, but we're just very, very concerned about the height of the building, the height and the mass of the building. There were some mistakes made in planning terms in the 1970s within eyesight of this particular structure. And from Heritage Ottawa's standpoint, we always wish that we could learn from those lessons. This building is, in our view, too tall, and in fact is very disturbing to the character of the heritage area, both in the immediate surrounding area, but of course across Kent Street, where there's a wonderfully homogeneous district preserving the architectural heritage and character of an important part of Ottawa's architectural heritage. And so we're just very, very concerned that the developer has opted to go for an extremely tall building for that area of Centertown. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those are my comments.
Thank you so much for your delegation. Are there any questions for the delegation? Seeing none, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Are there any questions to staff by members? And I see nobody raising their hands. So okay, Councillor Leeper.
Thank you, Chair. To staff, the height issue is one that has been sent to us in correspondence. We know that there are folks, Heritage Ottawa has brought it up again today. How do you look at height in the context of a heritage conservation district? I'm cognizant that this is a fairly large area to protect from height. Our intensification goals around transit are met best by looking at areas exactly like this for height. But how do you look at it in a heritage context?
Through you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Leeper, for the question. So in this instance, as I mentioned in the presentation, it's the proposals contemplated as a landmark building, which is outlined in the secondary plan for the area that it contemplates up to 27 stories. So within that policy framework, our Heritage Conservation District plan for Centertown and Minto Park, which was created in 2022, so it's one of our most recent ones. It contemplates that these landmark buildings will be proposed within Centertown. So we look at how they are designed in order to mitigate the impact of the height that's being contemplated. So in this case, I think what is one of the strongest sort of aspects of the proposal is the retention of all the heritage buildings to sort of ground the design in the existing character of Centertown. They made the Legion building the focal point. They've separated the Legion building from the high-rise portion by a band of glazing. That set, the tower itself is set in 2 to 3 meters. And then there's a careful transition towards excuse me, the residential area to the east. So it's those kind of design and architectural considerations that we look for to in an HCD to mitigate that height impact.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions to staff? Seeing none, is the technical amendment carried? Carried, thank you. And is the motion as amended carried? Carried. Thank you so much. This report will be submitted to council on January 24th for consideration. Our next item is an application to alter 125 Lakeway Drive, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. This item has been held for delegation, so we will now receive a presentation from staff.
Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, and committee members. Today I'll be giving a brief presentation on staff's recommendation to approve the application to alter 125 Lakeway Drive, a Grade 2 property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, located in the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District. Next slide. The residence at 125 Lakeway Drive is located on the east side of Rockcliffe Park and is part of the new Rockcliffe subdivision plan of 1949. The property has an existing 1.5-story building clad in synthetic stone, a deep open front lawn, and features a semicircular driveway. Trees separate the property from its neighbors, and at the rear, the property's grade slopes towards the rear property line. Next slide, please. The proposed alterations include building a second story across the entire building footprint, recladding the building in a combination of natural stucco and stone, adding new windows at the front, and creating a more prominent front entrance. Additional alterations include an addition on the east side of the structure to accommodate a 2-car garage, and a single-story addition at the rear, which will include an enclosed pool with open terrace above. Here on the site plan, you can see extensions to the existing footprint in light gray, and the pool addition in the rear in a speckled hatch. Next slide. So here are the front and rear elevation renderings. At the front, you will see the existing semicircular driveway retained, the building reclad in a mix of natural stone and stucco, and the new windows at the front, and a more prominent front entrance. At the rear, you will see the enclosed pool addition built into the landscape. Next slide. Here are the side elevation renderings. In the render to the left, you will see the natural sloped grade and the new cladding extending to all facades. Next slide. Here is the proposed landscape plan showing substantial retention of the open front lawn and landscape features. The existing maple tree in the front yard and mature basswoods that line the property will be retained. An existing diseased fruit tree will be removed from the front of the property and replaced with a sugar maple. The existing pavers on the east side of the garage will be removed and replaced with a stepping stone walkway with grass joints to increase the green space. The semicircular driveway will remain, and in the rear, the grade will continue to naturally drop off, allowing for the single-story pool addition to be built into the landscape. Staff are generally supportive of the submitted landscape plan, but are of the opinion that the additional plantings in strategic locations could further reduce the visual impact of the proposed additional height. A condition has been included to allow the applicant to continue to work with staff to refine the landscape details and ensure any new plantings are appropriately located on the site. Next slide. Heritage staff feel this proposal complies with the HCD policies and guidelines, and that the alteration will have little impact on the character of the HCD. The addition will be of a contemporary design and use natural materials. Although the addition of a second story will increase the height of the building, it will remain compatible with neighboring buildings in the associated streetscape. This is because 125 Lakeway is set back further from the street than the adjacent Grade 1 properties, reducing the impact of the additional height from the streetscape. Next slide. Heritage Ottawa, the Rockcliffe Park Residents Association, Councillor King, and neighbors within 30 meters of the property were notified of the application for alteration. Next slide. Heritage staff recommend that the application be approved for alteration, that minor design changes be delegated to the general manager of PRED, and that the applicant submit a final landscape plan for approval by Heritage staff prior to the issuance of the building permit, and that a Heritage permit be issued with a 2-year expiry date. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation. We did receive correspondence from 2 residents as well as Heritage Ottawa and the Rockcliffe Park Residents Association. We do have a number of registered speakers. The first registered speakers are Sharon Hodder and Michael Steele. Thank you for joining us. You have 5 minutes and they're just going to turn your microphone on. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to address the committee on the matter of this home. I am one of the local homeowners who was notified about the development application. And I would just like to say that my husband and I, his name is Michael Steele, he's not here today. We have a view of that home from our front, side, and backyards, as well as from the back windows of our home. And for us, it is presently a concern that it has been empty and abandoned for such a very long time. We can see that the people who own that home are making efforts to maintain the outside of the house by raking and shoveling snow. And we've talked to the people who are doing that work for them. We empathize that they're going through a process to get a design done and get an approval, and these things do take time. But in the meantime, this house is abandoned. And for that reason, it is a concern and a topic of conversation for many of the homeowners on Pond Street, not just ourselves. We've talked to our neighbors. It is obviously abandoned. This house is a risk for vandalism, for fire. We often see rodents trundling around, and we are very well aware that those rodents are trundling around our properties too. They might live in that house, but they come to our properties as well. So for all of these reasons, we are very anxious to have this house developed and occupied by a family who loves the home and who cares for the home and who will be good neighbors and good additions to the community for us to enjoy. Now, in terms of the design of the home, we see that it has presently very good bones, and it blends in very, very well with the streetscape on both Lakeway, where it fronts, and on Pond Street, where we can see it from our own yards and actually from the road as well. And I would say to you that the design that's put forward with the landscaping plan that's also being proposed, we like it. We like it very, very much. We are very enthusiastically waiting for this house to be approved and to look like the renderings instead of looking like the way it does now. We see that it is larger. However, the additions to the footprint are done in a way that is, I'm going to use the word subtle. The architect has done a good job of putting these additions in places where I'm sure they're meaningful to the homeowners who want the larger square footage in their home. But from the outside, it looks like many other houses in Rockcliffe. Walk around Rockcliffe. You'll see lots of houses of that size with that kind of look. And so for our perspective, it will be consistent with our street, especially as it evolves in the future, because many of the homes on Lakeway and on Pond are at an age where people will be starting to make changes to them. And this house is consistent with our streets now and with how we think our streets will evolve in the future, especially if committees like this look at the design applications and have the kind of consideration that's being done now. So we strongly support this. We really hope that it's approved. We're very happy that the staff suggested that it should be approved, and we hope very, very much that the committee will approve it. I have one other thing, though, related that I'd like to talk to you about, and this is somewhat more obtuse. I hope I'm able to explain it to you clearly and within my remaining time. Now, there is a common sewage line on Lakeway, and there is a common sewage line on Pond Street. But many of the houses that are on Lakeway do not connect to their common sewage line. They connect down the hill through the yards of the Pond Street houses and onto the common sewage line on Pond Street, which means that I have a municipal easement along my back property line, and I have 3 manhole covers in my back property line. And every so often, city staff are supposed to come to my yard and inspect these things. We moved into our house 2 years ago, and as Ralston knows, because I had to get him to help me, my neighbor at 165 Lakeway, her connection to the sewage line at the back of my house had failed, and I had sewage all over my yard, and it was absolutely disgusting. And trying to communicate this problem to the city staff and say, please come and fix this sewage, and listen to them say, well, it must be your sewage. Very difficult, very stressful. I moved into my house when the convoy protest was on during a pandemic. This was the last thing I needed. And then to get it fixed, they had to bring huge equipment into my yard to fix it. I have since done an enormous landscaping project. I have spent $140,000. And if you think the city is going to bring heavy equipment into my backyard in the future, and damage my yard and not pay me for that damage, I can tell you, you can think again.
Ms. Holder, your time has expired. Of course, the latter comments, aren't within the scope of the.
I would very much
Heritage.
like, Ralston, for the
But-
city to consider this as a timely opportunity to ask this house to connect the sewage line on Lakeway.
And those are items that my office, in my office's capacity is happy to examine.
Okay,
Of course, what's before us is this application.
okay,
I do thank you for your comments.
Okay.
And I think that they are relevant, especially in terms of this house having been on the Heritage Watch List.
yeah,
I just want you to know and the public to know that staff is examining, bringing a report forward in the near future around the Heritage Watch List so that we can have an update as to some of the challenging properties that we have throughout the city and in heritage
Mhm.
conservation districts. I
mhm,
think it's important for us to continue to have that discussion and for staff to continue to work in conjunction with owners to ensure that properties are improved, especially ones that are on the Heritage Watch List. But I really thank you for your comments. Are there
So, Ralston,
any?
should I
So I'm
follow
going to
up
ask,
on the specific issue that I had?
yes, so we will reach out to you on that
Thank you. I
specific
really,
issue.
really appreciate that. And
Not
thank
at
you
all.
again for your time.
And
really
I have to, of course, ask my colleagues whether they have any questions for you.
Oh, okay. I'm sure they don't, but
And I don't see any questions,
Yes,
so thank you so much for your
okay,
delegation.
thank you very much.
I appreciate it. The next delegate is Michelle Heyman from the Rockcliffe Park Residents Association.
Oh.
Thank you so much, and you have 5 minutes.
My name is Michelle Heyman and I represent the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District. I will say you can tell that I didn't grow up with social media given the length of my long reports. So that I submit on behalf of Heritage Committee. So I'm going to try to do a Twitter, TikTok version today. So as you know, heritage is not about what zoning will permit. Heritage bylaws are about protecting what zoning does not adequately protect. We are happy that this house will be redeveloped. As we just heard, it is on the Heritage watch list. And I know neighbors are very happy about it. However, we have to consider that this house is in a Heritage Conservation District and it has additional rules that need to be followed. So with that said, the issues that the Heritage Conservation, the Heritage Committee has is that there will be a change to the associated streetscape in this part of Rockcliffe. It will impact the future development on the street. It is not compatible with the grade 1 homes on the street. The roof height is not consistent with neighbors. And the new construction is not distinguishable from the old building and there is a decreased tree canopy. We respectfully disagree that because the building is set back further from the street, that this will reduce the visual impact of the additional height from the streetscape. To take a 1.5-story building at this setback and change the height to a 2.5-story building without moving the building even further back means that the building will be seen to double in height from what is there now. Concerning the future development, the neighboring house, 105 Lakeway, is also on the Heritage Watch List. When it is redeveloped, that house will take direction from 125 Lakeway, and so begins the domino effect and downward spiral as to how the character of the streetscape will be even further eroded and incompatible with the mid-century modern characteristics of this part of Rockcliffe. Alterations and additions are supposed to contribute to the heritage character of the conservation district. The proposed 2.5-story neo-traditional home interrupts the flow and does not contribute to the mid-century modern heritage character attributes of Rockcliffe, of this part of Rockcliffe. The additional story, along with the very steep gabled roof, accentuates the tallness and verticality of the proposed building and makes the structure less compatible. The other homes on the streetscape are mostly 1 and 1.5 story with very shallow, low-pitched gable roofs that read low and horizontal. If you could please, that picture is up there. I ask you to look at the pictures, which are the grade 1 homes that should be giving direction to 125 as to compatible heights. Note that no grade 1 house is as tall as a 2.5-story building. Most are 1 story. There is one house that is two-story, but you'll notice that it has a very low pitch roof, and that building reads generally as a horizontal building. I will ask for the next slide. Oh, wait, sorry, well, you can still see it, but the grade 1 house on the left-hand side is 145 Lakeway. You can see that it is mostly a one-story building, and then it rises up to be a two-story building in just one section of it. So additions and alterations are not supposed to be taller than the original building, and they should be compatible. And if they are taller, they should be compatible with neighbors. The proposed height exceeds the existing roof by an entire story. A successful design would be for the roof heights to match that of the neighbors. So 2 stories on the 145 side and 1.5 stories on the 105 Lakeway side. These 2 photographs show the neighbors of 125 Lakeway. Notice the continuous low horizontal flow of these 3 homes versus the proposed design, which rises up and interrupts the characteristic mid-century design. Standard 11 of the Standards and Guidelines of the Conservation of Historic Places in Canada says additions should be distinguishable from the original. While additions are of their own time and are natural materials, they are not at all distinguishable from the original home. The homogeneous manner in which the materials are used removes the defining 1950s mid-century character of this nearly 70-year-old home. Lastly, the plan says that the removal of mature trees is strongly discouraged. Where a tree is removed, they should be replaced with a new tree of an appropriate size and species. Before this application, 10 mature trees were cut down at the rear of the property. These trees must be replaced, and the existing mature trees along the property line of 145 Lakeway, the grade 1 home, must be protected. Please stipulate adequate protection of the critical root zone of these trees. The street tree canopy of Rockcliffe Park is a key character defining element of the HCD. Mature trees that are cut down should be replaced. The additional story of the building also covers up more of the tree canopy that is visible from the streetscape. We ask that the roof height and steep pitch be reduced in keeping with the grade 1 homes and the neighbors, and that the removed trees be replaced on the lot. Thank you so much for listening to our concerns, and thank you for the work that you do to conserve the heritage of Ottawa.
Thank you so much for your delegation. Are there any questions for the delegation? Seeing none, thank you so much.
Okay.
Our next delegate, if necessary, is from Heritage Ottawa. And I see that Heritage Ottawa indicated that they do not need to speak to this item. We did have a late registration, Leah Liu. And she's being promoted online. And I believe that Leah Liu has joined. You have 5 minutes.
I have my partner here with me as well. Well, maybe you talk.
Hello. And if you can just speak a little bit louder so that we can hear you in the room, you can proceed. You have 5 minutes.
Where you go ahead.
Okay, I thought Tina was talking. Sorry. The only thing I was going to mention is it is the other place, the one I think it's 105 Lakeway. It is virtually a 2-story. It has 2-story at its greatest height. And also that ours is quite set back from the street and set back from that property. So in terms of perspective, like it might be 20, 25 feet behind that. So you're not getting, in terms of a 10 or 8 foot, whatever additional height, it's not that predominant because it's set back quite a ways further from the street. In fact, in terms of New Rockcliffe, 125 Lakeway is the furthest setback house from the street from any of the properties in New Rockcliffe. And also for the other house next door, I believe, I'm not sure what the
It's
address is. It's already been, I think, developed, and it's also, I think it's at a sort of two-story height, but it's also very much closer to the street.
sorry, the background is a little bit gloomy, so because I made some, yeah, funny thing. Yeah, so if I may, what I wanted to say is this, this redevelopment has taken us for 2 to 3 years, going back and forth to try to, be, how do we say, well blended in the neighborhood. We also consulted a few neighbors in our area, and then everybody is so supportive, especially the one next to our house, Jane. Her number is 75, I think. 95.
wow.
So very supportive of our design. We have altered the height of the roof since last committee meeting last year. So we did some alternation. I think this needs to be done as early as possible, as soon as possible. Our first delegation from a neighbor, it's really well presented. We don't need to add more words on that. You want to?
Yeah, I want to say, this was also done earlier by, I think, there was a building permit by Mr. Gillen, I believe. And
Yeah.
actually I continued along with the building permit, and it was for the same height. It was again 2 stories, 2.5, and it was approved. And I could have continued on with it, but the fact of the matter, it wasn't very appealing, and it really didn't fit in with the landscape
style.
or and the style of anything. So we decided at that time, I happened to meet Leigh at that time. Well, I hadn't met her at that time, and we decided to like forego it and to get something more aesthetically pleasing. Because if you take a look at that was approved, and actually I was continuing on with it, but then I decided it just wasn't really aesthetically appealing. But it was the same height or whatever that you see now.
Andre Godin is very well recognized architect designer, and then he submitted millions of applications in Rockcliffe. So that's why we hired him to do this work, and believe this, everything we've done is fitting what was required in this neighborhood. So yeah, I don't really have anything else to say. And not using.
Yeah, unfortunately, Andre's not here today because I think his
wife is a dental surgery stuff.
Right.
So
and sorry about that. We were unprepared to speak. We thought he would be here.
Or just listen to it.
Well, thank you. We do appreciate your comments. Does the committee have any questions for this delegation? Seeing none, thank you so much. And we always try, if we can, to accommodate even last minute requests to provide comment to this committee. So thank you so much for your delegation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you. So we will now move on to questions for staff. Are there any questions? And I see that Member Legault is raising her hand.
Hi. So I was just wanted to clarify. My understanding is that this is designated under Part 5 because it is a strut house, correct? Is that one of the main? Because then there have been 2 separate periods of major alterations in 99 and then in 2002. So like that, those character defining elements from the original design have already significantly deteriorated. Is that correct?
That is correct, and it is a grade 2 property. For those reasons, it has been heavily altered, new cladding additions, and so that's why it's graded as grade 2.
And just to clarify, so it's grade 2 within the Rockcliffe larger conservation period. Okay. I actually don't have any issues with the proposed design.
Thank you, Member Legault. Member Madigan.
Thank you. A question for staff. Questions and points raised by the local heritage committee, have those been responded to? And I don't think I've seen that in the package we received.
Yes, they have. This application was moving forward earlier, I guess, last year. And there was issues with the height. The applicant has reduced the height by 3 feet since that application. And then in terms of the landscaping issues with the trees that were removed, we were aware that trees were removed without a permit, and that is why we are suggesting a recommendation to submit a new landscape plan and new plantings in the rear.
Thank you. And one last question. Is there a requirement to sort of match the sense of this being a mid-century modern neighborhood?
So this is a grade 2 building, as I mentioned, and there already have been alterations that have occurred. So in terms of replicating what was there, that's not what we're trying to achieve here. The changes to the property is really just to improve the overall character of the area. And I think that there are improvements in this application in terms of new materials that are natural, increased trees in the landscape, and overall an improvement to the character of the streetscape.
Right. It's my first reaction is like it looks like it would fit elsewhere in Rockcliffe as a design, but bringing sort of traditional elements which were raised in some of the presentations, it seems that contradicts sort of that sense of mid-century modern, but it appears to though meet requirements from staff point of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Madigan. Member Quinn.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to pick up on my colleague's question and just ask if you could be more specific about whether the Heritage Conservation District designation speaks directly to the mid-century modern aesthetic of this part of Rockcliffe Park known as New Rockcliffe. Is there language associated with that?
No, there is not.
Okay, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
That was my question.
Thank you for the question. I do have a few questions of my own based on what we heard from the Residents Association's comments, and also noting that there's another property on this street which is on the Heritage Watch List. Does staff consider neighboring homes when evaluating a heritage permit application?
Yes, Chair. So we talked a lot about compatibility. And in terms of compatibility, we look at the context. And in this particular site, the property is set back significantly from the streetscape or from the street. It is adjacent a grade 1 property, which we did look at and consider. As it's been brought up here, the grade 1 property adjacent does have a 2-story tower that is directly beside this property and also set forward from where this building is. So we did look at that, and we feel that because of the setback, because of the difference in grade, that this is suitable in this streetscape.
Thank you for that answer. Is there a concern that as homes along a street within a heritage conservation district are altered, that we could lose heritage attributes of the HCD?
In this particularly instance, I don't think we're concerned with that. The landscaping is preserved here. We're seeing overall improvements to the entire HCD in terms of natural materials, replanting of new trees. And so therefore, we don't think that the attributes are at risk here.
And I know this might be theoretical, but is there a concern if we see a continued pattern of alterations on a street?
So I think every application is reviewed against their own merits. So we'd have to look at a new application and the conditions of that and review it the same as we would here. So yes.
So then how do we evaluate new applications if the other homes along the streets have been altered themselves? And is there a concern that this could create a new standard?
Again, I guess we would have to look at the conditions there, if there are setbacks similar to this property, and evaluate accordingly against the policies of the plan.
Okay, I think obviously in the context of the future, I think we need to have a continuing dialogue with Heritage staff and with the community about that issue. I think we've heard that emerge. I just have one last question. Can staff elaborate on what sort of continued work will need to be undertaken concerning the landscape plan, and how does staff intend to undertake that plan?
Yeah, so the recommendation or the condition is that the applicant submit a landscape plan before the building permit. And we've voiced that to the applicant team and are going to work with them to replace the trees maybe where they were moved, or sensitively place them to further screen the additional height.
I appreciate your answers. Those were all my questions, and I see that Councillor Leeper has raised his hand.
Thank you, Chair. I was interested in a response to the questions by members Quinn and Madigan with respect to what officially is the character of Lakeway. And the resident from Rockcliffe expressed some frustration with her body language when that answer was provided, that, you know, that it's not officially supposed to be single-story postmodern homes. So I've jumped into the HCD language, and I'm having difficulty reconciling your answer with the language that I think is in the HCD, which is that Lakeway is characterized almost entirely by single-story post-war houses. There is a distinct continuity in their scale, massing, and street setbacks. And sorry, the property is one of several mid-20th century residences constructed during the 50s and 60s, which relate to each other materials and design, mostly being one and a half, and split level residences. So there's multiple sections that describe the built form that characterizes Lakeway as single and a half story. It's not absolute language. It's couched in mostly. But I'm having difficulties reconciling the answer that you provided to members Quinn and Madigan with respect to why this is being allowed to go to a 2-story built form. Can I ask you to maybe explore that a little bit more for me? Because if that's an absolute requirement of the HCD, then I don't understand why we would take your recommendation to approve this. The clear development need notwithstanding.
Through you, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Leeper. I think you're reading from the HCD plan. I think that's what you're reading from. Lakeway is a mix of architectural styles, including mid-century modern buildings. I think Taylor's response to the question is that we don't have the requirement to make new buildings on that street mimic a mid-century modern style. So acknowledging that they are present on the street and that new development should be respectful of, compatible to the streetscape, but they do not have to be constructed in a mid-century modern style. And just as a note, maybe back to Councillor King's question, any new construction on the street will have to make a reference or consider the grade 1 properties on the street as opposed to new construction. So that is what we would be looking, we'd be looking for in those applications, but there's no requirement to mimic the style.
And I don't think the community is concerned about mimicking the style. I think what they're interested in is the continuity of built form, in which the built form of the street is largely one and a half story buildings, and now we're busting that 1.5 stories to go to 2 stories, and then to Chair King's comments was to stop the next one to go into 2 stories, and then the next one to 2 stories, and pretty soon the district is no longer characterized by 1 to 1.5 story homes. It's characterized by 2-story homes, which, you know, it is not what the HCD was intended to preserve.
Yep. Thank you, Councillor Leeper. So I think it's staff's opinion that the proposal meets the Rockcliffe Park HCD plan. The the contributing building adjacent to the property has a two-story projection. It's our interpretation that the height remains compatible with that, and the impact of the 2 stories will be mitigated through the setback, which is, I believe, about 11 meters. So while it is taller, and it does have a slightly different roof line, we are of the opinion that it will not detract from that mid-century architecture that's on the street. And again, there is mid-century buildings, but there's also a mix of architectural styles on the street as well.
Yeah, I still think we're mixing a discussion of style with height. And what the HCD seems to, in my lay understanding of it, set out as a character defining height on Lakeway. And when I take my virtual walk down Lakeway, you know, it is that single and a half story house. So I just wonder, you know, what protection the HCD is providing to a character that has been determined in past worthy of protection. And, you know, this isn't an intensification argument. You know, it's a big ass house. It's going to become an even bigger ass house. You know, I've got some sympathy for the zoning discussions when we are trying to accomplish an intensification for new housing. You know, in this case, I think we're ignoring the HCD characteristics that have been described in order to simply make a bigger house. So I'm going to mull that over as quickly as I can over the course of the next 8 seconds before Councillor King calls for a vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper. And I was wondering if this would be an appropriate time maybe to give direction to staff around reviewing the streetscape and then coming back to committee to share how we could proceed and in effect protect the Heritage Conservation District.
Yes.
Thank you for taking that direction, because I think that we hear that very clearly. I think this goes beyond one application, though we look at things one application at a time. I think what we're hearing from the Residents Association is that there needs to be an examination that is more holistic as we go forward. So I'm pleased that direction was accepted. I see that Member Madigan has raised his hand.
Yes, continue discussion from Councillor Lieber. I think the mixing of style with size is mixing it. Height is not necessarily part of style, it's part of a characteristic. And if the height is an essential characteristic of the HCD, then it should be maintained. Now, maybe zoning permits higher roof lines and such, but then we're mixing things. But with your explanation, I think this house does not really follow the intent of that area. You know, at my first reaction of seeing it, it doesn't really fit with the mid-century modern neighborhood combined with the height aspect to it. So it's not style. Like, you can still do the house in a very contemporary language, maintaining elements of height and size and setbacks, and develop something of its time. And right now it's referencing more historic styles which are relevant elsewhere in Rockcliffe, and it doesn't have the height that, you know, the rest of the neighborhood has or the area is supposed to have. So I sort of question again sort of the aspect of mixing style with just size requirements. Thank you.
Are there any other questions of staff? Okay. So is the report carried? Carried. And with dissents noted and also direction. Yeah, also with direction taken. Thank you so much. Our next item is an application to alter 149 King George Street, a property designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. This item was held by Member Quinn, so we will undertake a presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Okay, next slide. It's an application for 149 King George Street. The property at 1 King George Street is located on the west side of Quill Street and has frontage on both Glen Avenue on the north, King George on the south, as well as Quill Street to the east. The property contains the former Overbrook Public School and schoolyard and a small surface parking lot. The former Overbrook Public School is a two-story rectangular building clad in red brick and constructed in 3 phases is 1916, 1947, and 1955. The building is an example of a collegiate Gothic style, a late variation of the Gothic revival style, inspired by the university campuses of Oxford University and Cambridge in England, that became popular for universities and schools across North America in the early 20th century. Next slide. The building is located prominently on the corner of Quill and King George Streets, which is an attribute of the property as a landmark. Other attributes identified in the Statement of Cultural Heritage Value include the 2-story massing and flat roof, the red brick, large cornice and frieze, to name a few. The addition from 1955, located on the right in the images above, is omitted for the designation, as is the schoolyard and the parking lot. Next slide. The application before you today is to construct 8 townhouses facing Quill Street in the location of the current playground and parking lot. Next slide. The new construction will be 3 stories in height, clad primarily in red brick and located approximately 9 meters away from the school building. The new construction has been sited to ensure visibility of the designated building from the corner of King George and Quill Street. The townhouses have been designed to respect the former Overbrook Public School in terms of materials, design, and datum lines. Red brick will be used to reflect the materiality of the school, and the windows are inspired by the wall-to-window pattern on the historic building. Additionally, the banding and horizontality of the townhouses relate to the cornice on the former Overbrook Public School. Through this application, no changes are proposed to the actual heritage building. Next slide. In terms of consultation, both Heritage Ottawa, the ward councillor, and neighbors were notified. The next slide. And finally, staff recommend to approve the application. Additionally, we're also making a recommendation to allow staff to amend the designation bylaw, as the current wording speaks to the school being located on the corner, which it would no longer be located on the corner if this application moves forward. And lastly, to issue the heritage permit. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation. We got a good number of letters on this item from residents, as well as Heritage Ottawa, the Overbrook Community Association, and the parents of Vincy School. We also have Peter Hume here on behalf of the applicant, who can make a delegation if he desires. Sure. We did get our a request for a full presentation on this from a member, so we would be happy for you to provide a delegation. I do see that member Quinn has raised her hand.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I just had really couple of questions for staff. I don't know if we need to entertain a full.
Okay. If that's the case, then
I leave it to your discretion, of course.
No, if that's the case, then Mr. Hume, you are relieved.
Not that we wouldn't want to hear from you, but just.
And of course, Heritage Ottawa is also registered. I just want to give them the opportunity if they are interested in participating. They've indicated that they're not, so we can move to questions of staff. Member Quinn.
Thank you very much. My question pertains specifically to the landmark status of the school, which seems to be determined, really significantly by its siting on the corner. And the visibility of the school from that angle, it's very difficult from the renderings. I see when I look at the site plan that the King George, perspective lines the last unit up with the school, and I just want to make sure that I'm reading that correctly. If somebody could confirm that.
Yes, that's correct.
That's correct.
Yes.
So at any rate, the rendering makes it difficult to really see how much of the school is still going to be visible from that angle. Also the brick, and I think this was raised by somebody who had submitted a letter. I can't recall who, but I did agree that the brick that of the front facade of the series of townhouses could possibly wrap around that particular unit so that it speaks more consistently with the school. As opposed to it just sort of stops after a few feet. So that would be something. I'm not sure if that has been asked of the proponent or not. But if you maybe could just provide a little bit more information about the perspective from that corner angle of the school, because really that long side really has carried a lot of weight in terms of the building's landmark status. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I might ask the applicant to come back up. Just to help me answer any questions in case I do make any errors. Member Quimby, you are correct that the side townhouse will align with the front facade or the historically front facade of the former school. And red brick, yes, I see that was a suggestion in comments that were submitted. I have no issues if that was to continue around the side of the facade. I don't want to speak on behalf of the applicant on that.
And the applicant is coming down to provide a bit of context and comment for you, Member Quinn.
Thank you.
So we have no issue with adding more brick along that side to provide more context to the townhouses and the school. And I can tell you we've done, and we can circulate it. We've done some view planes where you're standing on the corner of across the street at the community center to look at that view plane to determine its prominence. Because as part of the original submission that we made, the townhouses were squarely in the middle, and that truncated the view plane to the front of the school. So it was a deliberate measure on our part, based on feedback we got from the city and our heritage consultant, to move the buildings or to move the whole building back, so that side yard from the property line to the building is almost aligns to the front facade of the school. So it's about 7.5 meters from the property line that setback is, to open up that view plane to preserve that prominence.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for providing the detail. It's just a little difficult sometimes with the renderings to interpret. And I'm pleased to hear that if that's something that continuing the brick might certainly, I think, improve the relationship.
Thank you so much for that question.
Thank you.
And now we move to Member Legault.
Yeah, I'd just like to clarify with city staff, what exactly is the school selling? Are they severing the lot? And how does a school exist without a schoolyard? Or
I will defer the second
Okay.
portion to the applicant.
So it's a private school,
right?
and it's governed by. So it's not governed by the same set of legislation that a public school would be governed by. So the intent is to sever the property off from the schoolyard. The school can continue to exist in its current form as a private school. The only issue is with some of the preschool programs. Preschool programs have prescribed space requirements, outdoor space requirements, that the school is going to have to demonstrate that it meets post severance to ensure that it remains licensed.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, this was a public school that was then sold to this private academy. So I guess I'm asking this because like obviously with historic buildings, we want to maintain a continued use. Like an ideal situation, right, is that a school remains a school. So severing the actual playground from the school disables it from continuing on as a school. I mean, with the exception of, I guess, a private school that can have, you know, maybe they walk to the park or something for that preschool program, but it's definitely stripping it of a major character defining element of the fact that it'll no longer have a yard.
If I can speak to that, the schoolyard was not included in the designation bylaw as an attribute. There's only the physical structure. Therefore, there's no association or associated application required for or impact to the schoolyard from a heritage context.
But to clarify, the school itself is part of the designation.
The physical building is,
Okay.
yes, and it does not, we cannot regulate the use of the building, so
Right.
there are options for adaptive reuse in the future.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Member Madigan.
I think to carry on sort of same sort of sense, when I was reading through the document, it almost read that the schoolyard was part of the designation of the building. It seemed like a gray zone. Because usually oftentimes the designation will clearly say the designation is confined to the footprint of the building. But there's context that the schoolyard was written about in the heritage designation of the building.
The bylaw doesn't specifically say omit the schoolyard. However, speaking with the author of the bylaw, that was not included at the time, and it limits to the original and the first edition of the original structure and as well as the first edition of the on the school, and not so the secondary edition was excluded purposely, and there's no mention of the schoolyard or the parking lot, any of the grounds in the designation bylaw.
That's at the behind the scenes, but the way it's written now, it's really open to interpretation. That the schoolyard is part of the designation.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
The way the heritage description is done for the building, it describes the schoolyard as being part of it. So, you know, coming in blind and looking at what was actually approved, it seems the schoolyard is part of the designated character of the building. Or site, I should say, overall.
It's not listed as an attribute. I'm not seeing it in the list.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for those questions. All right, there any more questions for staff on this application? Seeing none, is the report carried? Carried. This report will be submitted to council on January 24th for consideration. The next item is designation of 415 Kenwood Avenue under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We have a presentation. And we're just awaiting the presentation online. And I think we're ready to proceed.
Okay. So this is a designation for 415 Kenwood Avenue. Next slide, please. The property is located in Highland Park at the corner of Kenwood and Roosevelt Avenues. The church was constructed in the Tudor Revival style and was designed by William James Abra of the architectural firm Richard and Abra. Next slide. The property at 415 Kenwood Avenue has design value as a representative example of the Tudor Revival church architecture. Typical of the style, the church features a stiffly pitched roof, prominent gables, irregular massing, and half timbering with brick cladding. The church is directly associated with architect William James Abra. In 1913, the congregation engaged Abra of the architectural firm Richards and Abra to design the church. The firm was a prolific firm in Ottawa, credited with designing numerous notable buildings, including the Byward Market Building and several Baptist church commissions. The property is physically, functionally, and historically linked to its surroundings as a place of worship located within the residential community since its construction in 1913. Having housed numerous different congregations over the years and denominations, its contextual value and relationship to the surrounding area, historical and visual connection to the residential neighborhood is important in supporting the character of this part of Highland Park. Next slide. As the first Baptist church to be constructed in Westboro, a growing streetcar suburb, the property has historical value as it yields information about the growth of the city and the expansion of the Baptist congregation in the early 20th century in Ottawa. The property is important in maintaining and supporting the historic character of Highland Park neighborhood. Its long-standing presence as a religious institution, the design of the building, and its integration within the neighborhood all support the historic character of Highland Park as a 20th century streetcar suburb. The church is also important in maintaining the historic character of Westboro, reflecting John E. Cole's vision for an idyllic neighborhood through its design, materials, and massing. Last slide. And here I've included some of the heritage attributes we're proposing for the designation, which include the cladding materials, the red brick and the half timbering, the steeply pitched roof, prominent portico with wood detailing, and exposed rafter tails. Thank you.
Thank you for that brief presentation. We did receive correspondence on this file from the Westboro Community Association as well as Heritage Ottawa. We do have David Jeans registered to speak. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I strongly support this designation, as you've seen, as does Heritage Ottawa. I wanted to mention from a personal point of view that this building is definitely a landmark in the neighborhood, prominent on the corner of two of the principal streets of Highland Park, Kenwood and Roosevelt. The architect, Bill Abra, was actually a resident of the neighborhood, so he's important to Highland Park as well as to the whole Ottawa Valley in terms of the contribution to its architecture by him and his partner, Hugh Richards. This building has been on Heritage Ottawa's walking tour of Westboro and Highland Park, which is led by Professor Bruce Elliott, the historian of Nepean, and myself. The report says that it wasn't possible to contact the owner of the building. I met him last May, Shiju Matthew, who is the pastor of the Revived Nations Church, and he invited me to attend their inaugural service in that building, which was quite an interesting experience for me. I believe they're there every Sunday, so the building is very much in use. It's been extensively renovated inside. He told me he was concerned. He knew that it was being considered for designation. He was concerned that this would prevent alterations, but I assured him that it wouldn't impact any plans they had for renovating the interior. As I say, from my personal point of view, I'm very glad that this building is being designated, and I hope that you approve the recommendation today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. Does committee have any questions for Mr. Jeans? Seeing none, thank you so much. And Heritage Ottawa is also on the list. Do you need to participate? No. Great. Are there any questions to staff on this item? Councillor Lieber.
Just a quick comment to say thank you to staff for your work on this. This has proceeded relatively quickly as far as these things go. And thank you very much as well to the members of the Westboro Community Association who have been pressing for this, and I believe contributing some of their own research to the effort. So Heather and team, thank you very much for your work on this. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you so much, Councillor Leeper. I see no other questions. So is this report carried? Thank you. So this report will be submitted to council on January 24th for consideration. The next item is designation of Bible House at 315 Lisgar Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And we will have a presentation.
Hello again. I will be giving a brief presentation on staff's recommendation to issue a notice of intention to designate the Bible House located at 315 Lisgar Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Next slide, please. The property is located in the Centertown neighborhood in Ward 14. The Bible House is a two-story brick commercial building that was constructed in 1922 and designed by local architect Lieutenant Colonel Clarence James Burritt. The property can be seen outlined in red on this slide. The evaluation of this property was prompted in 2022 when the update to the Centertown and Minto Park HCD plan was taking place. Heritage planning staff identified this property for further review as it was not within the existing boundaries of the HCD, nor listed on the city's municipal heritage register. Because of the absence of heritage protection and the changes to the city's heritage register, staff undertook a thorough review of this property. Next slide. Now I'll speak to the property's cultural heritage value. The property at 315 Lisgar Street holds historic and architectural significance as a formal Bible house constructed in 1922. The two-story commercial building, constructed of buff brick, features a traditional storefront with distinctive design elements. The property's architectural integrity has been well preserved, reflecting its original design and function as a religious mission. It serves as a prime example of commercial architecture with a retail space on the lower level and office and meeting space above. The building's design is a testament to its historic function as a Bible house. The Bible House is also associated with the Ottawa Auxiliary Bible Society and Bible Societies worldwide. Originally owned and operated by the Ottawa Auxiliary Bible Society, the building's purpose centered around printing and distributing religious books and pamphlets. The building's design and its historic function contributes to its understanding of the growth of Christianity in the early 20th century in Ottawa and beyond. Next slide. Located in the Centertown neighborhood, the property is situated within an area that has evolved from a small cluster of houses and shops to a fully developed neighborhood featuring a mix of residential and commercial structures. The Bible House's presence contributes to the urban layout of central Centertown and adds to the diverse architectural fabric of the area. Next slide. This slide lists the property's identified heritage attributes as listed on the property's statement of cultural heritage value. The prominent attributes include the brown brick cladding, decorative metal band with a quatrefoil motif, retractable awning, 1922 date stone, decorative projecting sign in the shape of a Bible, and a hammered glass linear grid leaded transom with Bible House written in stained glass. And in terms of consultation, staff have had correspondence with the owner and have offered to meet to discuss the designation. The owner is aware that the report is being brought forward. The councillors, Centertown Citizens Community Association and Heritage Ottawa have also been notified. And in conclusion, staff's evaluation has determined that the Bible House meets 5 of the 9 criteria required for designation. And therefore, this item recommends that Built Heritage Committee recommend that council issue a notice of intention to designate the property. That concludes this presentation.
Thank you for that brief presentation. We did get correspondence from Heritage Ottawa. We did have a speaker registered, Shannon Hoops Ripley from the Church of the Messiah, but she is not online. And I'm assuming that Heritage Ottawa does not need to make a comment. Okay. No, thank you for that. So are there any questions to staff? And I see that Councillor Troster has raised her hand.
Hi, I want to thank you very much. I want to thank staff very much for moving forward with the intention to designate this building. I simply wanted to note that, You know, if you walk down that piece of Lisker Street now, everything around it is being taken down. The building beside it, the Wallachs, is going to be redeveloped. Everything across the street has been taken down and now is a large shiny new condo building. So I just want to say this is why we have heritage designation, to help maintain the character of Centertown. And I would hope that should the owners ever sell the property, that whoever purchases it treats it with care. You know, I think we've seen the dangers of wholesale urban renewal without protecting buildings like this one. But I have to say, you know, I moved to Ottawa 20 years ago. I never would have guessed that this would be the last one standing on that block. So thank you for preserving it.
Thank you for those comments, Member Madigan.
Yes, thank you. To me, this is like a jewel in Ottawa. Like you come across certain buildings and cities that are unique to that city. And when you walk into the neighborhood, like this one stands out. Like I recall first coming to Ottawa and walking Blizzard Street, and I recall that building sort of stick in my mind. Like it has certain characteristics that just make it cute, distinctive. I support your designation. The thing about the description, I would make it more detailed and make sure it's very complete, that the parapets, the hood moldings, is the side elevation also, the alleyway also included in the designation?
That is not listed as an attribute, nor are the additions at the rear.
Okay, so the original side elevation in the alleyway is not part of the destination.
The whole property would be designated, and we have listed the attribute of the buff brick, which extends to all facades.
Right, but as like, there's more detail to the facades than just the brick. Yeah, you know, it's a quibble, but other people quibble about that if they're doing changes to the building, like the hood moldings over the windows, between the windows, the parapets are distinctive, but are not described. You do describe the traditional storefront, but the supporting graphic show that the original storefront was different. Is there any restriction? Sorry, a couple of questions, but there's no restrictions by designating the current storefront that a future or current owner couldn't return it back to the original storefront, is there?
No, there are no restrictions, and we would encourage someone to do that. The front entrance has been enclosed, just I guess for maybe weather reasons and such, but behind that storefront, it is recessed, and the transom stained glass still exists today. So it would be encouraged to remove it, but it's not a requirement either.
Okay, thanks. I try to support this, and I would also, as suggested, make the wording more descriptive to capture all the features of this very much a jewel in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate those comments and the questions. Member Quinn.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. This is just to say that I will also be supporting this designation. I'm very pleased to see it here before us today. But I would also support my colleague, Mr. Madigan's recommendation that those details be specified, those architectural details be specified. I think we've seen examples of what can happen when those elements are in fact not included specifically. If it's just assumed, then that can come back to bite us. So please, my support would be to include those details. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those comments. The registered speaker has not joined us. So at this, sorry, Councillor Leeper.
Sorry, I was looking for my my hand raised there. I would just note the time to add additional characteristics to the building is now, or at least by the time we pass it at council. When is this intended to go to council?
The 24th of January.
24th of January. So if members of the committee are willing to pass this today, it will be with the characteristics as they're currently described. If members have ideas as to what other features should be protected, you know, we do have one more opportunity at council, and so members can submit those now. But the only way to make sure that this proceeds through the designation with the characteristics that you want to see in there is to modify the recommendation today. Do you suggest a wording? So that's, if you don't have wording today, my strong suggestion would be to make sure that you speak to somebody who's on the committee as well as staff before the city council meeting to see whether or not an amendment to the committee's recommendation can be passed at the council meeting.
Yeah, and as chair, I'd be willing to move those amendments at council.
Perfect. Okay, so that gives, that should give you the comfort you need.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that intervention, and I'm always happy to work with staff and committee on amendments and some changes. Is the report carried? Carried. Thank you. So this report will be submitted to council on January 24th for consideration, notwithstanding the discussion we had concerning the potential for amendments at council. The next item is designation of Southminster United Church at 1040 Bank Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We have a presentation.
This one's me again. So this property is located in the Old Ottawa South neighborhood in Ward 17. Southminster United Church is a large gable roof church constructed of cinder block and clad in sandstone. The church is located at the corner of Bank and Elmer Streets overlooking the Rideau Canal. The property can be seen outlined in red on this slide. The property is currently listed on the City of Ottawa's Heritage Register. In 2017, council approved amendment to zoning bylaw to permit a mixed-use development at the rear. In the staff report, staff stated there is the potential for the church to be designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and if it were determined to merit designation, this could happen after construction. Now that construction has began, the city has determined that Southminster United Church is a strong candidate for designation under Part 4 as it meets 6 of the 9 criteria for designation. Next slide. So now I'll speak to the property's cultural heritage value. The church, built in 1932, is a representative example of the modern interpretation of the Gothic Revival style. Many of its features are characteristic of the style, including the symmetrical design, an emphasis on verticality, included pointing arch windows and doors, with uniformly colored facades of Nepean sandstone. The church is the work of local architect John Albert Ewart, a well-known architect in Ottawa. The property contributes to the understanding of the United Church in Canada, a union of Methodists, Presbyterians, and Congregationalists in 1925. Soon after its formation in 1931, Southminster United Church was established, uniting the Methodist and Presbyterian congregations in Ottawa South. Next slide, please. Southminster United Church is important in defining and maintaining the character of Old Ottawa South. Its location at the intersection of Bank and Elmer, overlooking the Rideau Canal, next to the Bank Street Bridge, makes this an important site in the area that is historically and visually linked to its surroundings. The property is a landmark in Old Ottawa South as a gateway to the community with its deep setback and prominent front lawn. Next slide, please. This slide lists the property's identified heritage attributes as listed on the property's statement of cultural heritage value. The prominent attributes include the cruciform plan, Nepean sandstone cladding, pointed arch stained glass windows, prominent front vestibule, and church cornerstones. The cedar ceiling and modest motif decoration adapted from Sherburne Abbey are the only interior attributes included in the proposed designation. In terms of consultation, the property owner was notified of the proposed designation. Staff then met with the owners, providing them with the chance to review the heritage attributes and share insights into future work. The Old Ottawa South Community Association and Heritage Ottawa were also notified of the designation. Both the councillor and community association are in support. In conclusion, staff put forward the Built Heritage Committee recommend that council issue a notice of intention to designate the property under Part 4 of the Act. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that brief presentation. We did receive correspondence from Heritage Ottawa as well as the Old Ottawa South Community Association. We do have a number of registered speakers. The first speaker is Laura Iricha from Old Ottawa South Community Association. And I believe she's being promoted.
Can't hear.
Hello. Thank you for joining us, Laura. You have 5 minutes to address the committee. And we unfortunately can't hear you. And the committee coordinator is suggesting that you try to call in if you are not able to make your computer connection purely work with the audio. Maybe for the sake of time, as you're dialing in, we'll ask Miss Patterson, who's next on the list, to make her deputation.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, and the members of the committee for the opportunity to appear before you. I'm a member of the Secretary of the Council, of the Church's Council, and I'm very glad to have this application come forward, and I support it. One of the most important things to me about this application, not only to recognize the importance of the church, but recognize its contextual value as a landmark in Old Ottawa South. I would also draw attention to the fact that in the research, it missed the other very important part, that the Nepean sandstone cladding of the church was also chosen by the city when they built the Sunnyside Library in 1951. So it just sort of shows you how the characteristic of the building was picked up by other buildings in Old Ottawa South. What is important to me is that the building is 2 stories, and as Old Ottawa South, being a suburb of the city from that time, is being developed, I would hope that the height, the 2-building height of the landmark church would also influence other decisions made in the area. I want to thank the city's researchers for meeting with members of the church. And I would also like to say that I'm a member of Heritage Ottawa and the Historical Society of Ottawa. And for purposes of the city staff, the archives of the church go back to 1894, and they are stored at the City of Ottawa Archives. So I thank you very much. Due to financial issues with the church, we sold some of our property, and we now have the introduction of tall condos into Old Ottawa South. This is very concerning to me as a member of the Old Ottawa South community, and we don't want the heritage designation of the church, we hope, will be something that will prevent what happened in Centertown around the Bible House, as Councillor Trotcher indicated, will not happen to Old Ottawa South. So in short, I support this application, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your delegation. Are there any questions for this delegate? Seeing none, thank you so much. And now we are going to try and see if we can go back to Laura. And I think she's indicating that.
I'm trying, but not yet.
Laura, we kind of heard you there a little bit.
Oh, hey, okay, let's try this again.
And we can't hear you in the committee room.
Sorry,
Okay.
Chair.
I'll try again. I'm on the line.
Okay, so it's very light, and I don't know if staff or technical staff can try to turn up the volume.
Is there a chat function here? No.
And are you speaking as close as possible to your device or your microphone?
As closely as I can.
No, we unfortunately, we can't hear you in the committee room. And you were trying to, I'm assuming you were trying to dial in with the instructions?
Yes, give me a minute. Yeah, I'm trying.
And in the interim, I'm assuming that Heritage Ottawa has no comment. And so we'll go to Heritage Ottawa as we wait for Laura to connect.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief while the technical wizards get at it. Ours is a comment. We fully support the designation proposal. We think that it's eminently sensible and much deserved. My comment, our comment, is much more sort of in sorrow than in anger. We just take issue with the description in the staff document about modest motif decoration. We think that that really doesn't do justice to the features of the church that are being described and that contribute to the case for designation. So not that we want to start any fistfights here on the floor of your committee, but just to say that we think that language more appropriate, more suitable, and more in recognition of those decorative features is certainly merited here. Thanks very much.
Thank you for those comments. Councillor Leeper has a question.
Sorry, I'm not entirely sure what that means. Can you just unpack that a little bit for those of us who may not have some of the architectural background?
Well, Councillor, modest motif decoration sounds as though it's sort of rather plebeian and really not worthy of any distinction and mention. We think that perhaps some reference to the degree of craftsmanship that is involved with the decoration. There's a reference to a noted abbey in England, which is evidently, I've not been to Sherburne Abbey, but evidently is worthy of quote in the staff report. So we just think that it goes beyond the decorative features of the church go beyond the connotation of modest. I hope that helps.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you so much for your intervention. And my understanding is that we have Laura on the phone. So we will be able to take your delegation. You do have 5 minutes. Hopefully you're connected and you can go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hallelujah. Appropriate given that this is a church. So the Old Ottawa South Community Association simply wanted to express its strong support for this notice to designate. It's our landmark. It's a gateway on our traditional Main Street. We also agree with Heritage Ottawa that the interior of the church should not be described as modest. Potentially this would invite in future a total, well, not total because they do recognize the ceiling and a few of the other elements, but the Latinate form of the building and the arches, that side aisles that the ceiling rests on are character defining I would think in pretty much anyone's definition of what constitutes a character defining element of the interior of the church. And we would very much like, if at all possible, to see that included in the designation. That would mean that in future, should the church not become a church or become a even more of a secular congregational area, that the character that is not just the outside of the church, but that is the experience that the architect intended for people to have when they were within the sanctuary would be maintained. So that would be our only additional comment, but we really appreciate the work that staff has done here. We are very lucky in Old Ottawa South that between the Bank Street Bridge, the church, the College of Physicians and Surgeons, the old convent, it creates a certain ambiance, a certain viewscape as you enter the neighborhood. That viewscape can also be appreciated from the canal. And it's actually beautiful if you're skating down the canal, coming from downtown and heading to Old Ottawa South, and then you see the bridge with the church and the College of Physicians and Surgeons to your left. And I think all of that the whole tableau is something that very much merits it's moving forward with the notice to designate. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. I just want to check the committee room to see if there are any questions for you. Seeing none, thank you so much for your delegation and for your patience as we've been working through a lot of technical problems, unfortunately, today. Notwithstanding that fact, I think we're still making decent time. So I'm always happy about that. So thank you so much. Are there any questions to staff? And I see that the local councillor, Councillor Menard, has raised his hand. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks so much, Chair. And not so much a question. I just wanted to say thank you very much to staff for their work here. This is a really important area in Old Ottawa South and in Capital Ward. It's not just a church either. They host a lot of events there, so it's actually become much more of a community hub over time. There is housing going in and around this area as well. It's developing into, it's one of my favorite spots in the entire ward at Bank Street Bridge. And right beside it is this church, which people I'm sure will remember as they're walking, biking, or driving by it. So I, again, just wanted to thank the staff for all their work here and to the church and the folks that run the operations there to continue to do that, making it into a community hub. It's very, very appreciated. So thanks all around.
Thank you for those comments. I don't see any other hands raised for questions. So is this report carried? Carried. Thank you. So this report will be submitted to council on January 24th for consideration. The next item is designation of former W.C. Edwards and Company Building, 290 City Centre Avenue under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We have a presentation from staff.
Thank you, Chair King. The presentation today will be given by my colleague Lauren Luchensky. She is one of 3 heritage researchers we have on our team, and the 3 researchers we have are a big reason why there's so many designations in front of you today. They are conducting excellent, detailed historic research, and Lauren worked with myself and Luis Suarez on this on the designation that's in front of you.
Good morning, Chair King and Built Heritage Committee members. Today I'm presenting on Heritage staff's proposal to designate 290 City Centre under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Next slide, please. The building at 290 City Centre is a 1.5-story red brick commercial building. The property is located on the north side of Somerset Street in the City Centre complex in Ward 14. The City Centre complex is located between Albert Street, Somerset Street, City Centre Avenue, and the Trillium O train line. The property can be seen outlined on red on this slide. Next slide, please. Construction in 1925, the building at 290 City Centre is a strong representative example of a vernacular style building with Spanish colonial revival influence. The Spanish colonial revival style was most common in Canada from the 1910s to the 1940s and was often used for institutional and commercial buildings. The building at 290 City Centre has direct associations with the W.C. Edwards and Company, which is one of the largest early lumber establishments in Eastern Ontario. The building at 290 City Centre was constructed as the company's administrative offices in 1925 and remained in use until the sawmill's closure in 1962. The company's namesake, William Cameron Edwards, was appointed to the Senate of Canada in 1903 by Sir Wilfrid Laurier and became one of the founding directors of the Canadian Forestry Association. Next slide, please. The building has historical associations with the industrialization of the area, which grew with the establishment of the Ottawa, Arnprior, and Parry Sound Railway in 1891 and the presence of the Canadian Pacific Railway. The railway was a catalyst for growth of railway-dependent industries such as sawmills, lumber yards, and railway yards in the area. The W.C. Edwards and Company building is important in supporting the area's historic character that flourished as railway-dependent industries and their associated residential neighborhoods were established in the early 20th century. As the administrative offices for the industrial operations of W.C. Edwards and Company, the building is physically and visually linked to the railway and historically linked to its supporting industrial uses. The building is one of the only remaining structures in West Centertown associated with the industrial rail era and is therefore a landmark in the vicinity. Next slide, please. The key attributes that contribute to the cultural heritage value of 290 City Center as a representative example of a vernacular interpretation of the Spanish colonial revival style include its red brick cladding, decorative gabled dormer with a curvilinear parapet, wooden door with side lights and a semicircular transom window with decorative brickwork, a steeply pitched hip roof, rectangular windows with decorative stone sills and keystones, string course above the foundation, and a large J&J fireproof safe built into the rear of the interior of the building's first story. The building at 290 City Center is a strong candidate for designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, as it meets 5 of 9 criteria for designation. This concludes my presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the brief presentation. We did receive correspondence from Heritage Ottawa, and we do have a number of registered speakers, starting with David Jeans.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'm speaking as an individual, but I do note for Heritage Ottawa that we're strongly in support of this designation. In fact, Heritage Ottawa has held a number of events in the building recently as the Orange Art Gallery, and it's become an important place for the organization. My interest is primarily because of the railway and industrial history. As has been explained, this was the offices for the W.C. Edwards Lumber Company, and which was one of the major players in the sawmill and planing mill industry around Ottawa, first at Rideau Falls and finally here adjacent to this property on Somerset Street with their planing mill, which was replaced by the city center development. Although W.C. Edwards himself never saw this building, his nephews, Gordon Edwards and Cameron Edwards, who were also very prominent Ottawa citizens. Gordon Edwards was a member of Parliament, resided at 24 Sussex Drive. Cameron Edwards, a prominent military man. They were successive presidents of the company with their offices in this building, as was their brother-in-law, Edward Bremner, who was the general manager of the company and also representative of a major historic lumber importing company in Britain called Watson and Todd. And this was also Watson and Todd's Canadian address. So lots and lots of important industrial history here. As a landmark, actually best viewed from Somerset Street, the address used to be 991 Somerset before the building of the bridge, which really made the building inaccessible directly from Somerset, but still viewed from Somerset, it's an imposing structure. I was interested in the architectural comparison to other of the buildings of similar style, particularly the Rideau Branch Library by James McLaren, John Pritchard McLaren, architect. And although we don't know who the architect was of 290 City Center, my suspicion is that it was McLaren because of his very close involvement with the lumber industry and would have been closely associated with the Edwards brothers. So again, architecturally, it's interesting. As a landmark, it's interesting. And as part of Ottawa's industrial and railway history, it's a very important building. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that delegation. Are there any questions for Mr. Jeans? Seeing none, thank you so much. Next on the list is Heritage Ottawa. And and you gave it on behalf of, that's perfect. So the next registered speaker is Michael Poland. Thank you so much. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I am not here to speak on the substance of this matter. I'm unable to because we do not yet have the reports that would be necessary in order to allow us to do so. What I will tell you is that my request today is simply that this matter be deferred for a month. At which time we will have the necessary reports from an environmental consultant, from a structural consultant, and from our heritage consultant, John Stewart. This is a very complex property. There is contamination below this building and adjacent to the building. That arises out of a dry cleaning outlet that was in place for many years. Deferring this matter will not risk the building. The property is registered on the Heritage Registry, and therefore any application to demolish would require 60 days notice. Our request to defer this to the February meeting so that committee and council have sufficient information to understand the complexity associated with this building will not, as I say, put the building in danger. It's basically 30 odd days away. And the delay in having those available is a result, frankly, of timing. The owner has been in Israel, got stranded there. She went over to deal with her elderly mother. And we've been trying to work out exactly what can be said that would be helpful to this committee and council on the issue of the environment. What came out of that then prompted a need for a structural analysis. And both of those providing the framework so that Mr. Stewart can provide a comprehensive report to go along with it. If we defer, I'm hopeful that we will have all that we need in a matter of days. I have discussed this both with heritage staff and legal staff, and the notion is once we are in the possession of all three of these reports, that we would provide those to staff, and we would then sit down to see if there is some kind of negotiated settlement that could be arrived at. So I'm just asking for a month here. Thank you.
Thank you for your delegation. I see that Councillor Troster has raised her hand.
Hi, Mr. Polman. Can you just clarify for me, are you suggesting that should there be an environmental contamination with the building that you don't think it would be a good candidate for designation?
What I'm saying is that our client's been aware of the contamination for some time and has been working hard. If you're familiar with the property, it's a big open space. and has been working hard to eliminate that that contamination. And just to do it in the, you should pardon my use of the pun, in the vernacular, it was this big and now it's this big. And the this big is immediately adjacent to and underneath the building. So the question is, what can be done in order to address this contamination so as to prevent its migration onto other properties or onto municipal roadways, and still respect the building in some fashion? It might be easier if our client had a development proposal, and I'll use the context of the old registry office over by the Rideau Center, but we don't have that. And so all I'm saying is I'm not an expert in any of these three areas. I defer to each of the consultants, culminating with Mr. Stewart's report, in order to understand what can and cannot be done. And all I'm asking for is for committee and council to await that.
Okay, can I just ask a question to staff? From city staff's perspective, do you feel that there needs to be another external analysis to determine whether or not this property needs to be designated?
Thank you, Councillor Troster. The staff is confident with our evaluation of the property under 0906. We haven't seen the information that Mr. Paulin is referring to. We've advised that it may not be strictly relevant to 0906, which is what we use to evaluate whether a property should be designated or not. But again, we haven't seen that information, so I may defer to Christine Enta for her thoughts as well.
Thank you, Chair. Staff is correct that the consideration of whether or not there's any environmental issues relating to this property do not have any impact on the consideration for a notice of intent to designate. That said, in terms of the size of the property and any portion thereof which may be excluded from a particular designation or an evaluation of the elements on that parcel, it's my understanding that what is requested is that a heritage expert may provide additional information for staff to consider in terms of looking at parsing out certain elements of the parcel as a whole. I believe that is what is suggested from Mr. Paulowin's perspective in terms of how this may move forward. And it's my understanding from staff that they are not opposed to reviewing such a report as discussions move forward.
Thank you. Just a couple more further questions. So should there be should we designate the building and contamination is found to be under the property?
Councilor, there is just that much I know.
Okay. So just to city staff, what are then the obligations of the building owner? So let's say there's contamination underneath. Does that mean that should they want to develop the property, they need to disassemble the building and reassemble it? Do they have to move it? Like, I'm just wondering, if we designate now, and if Mr. Paulowin says there is contamination under the building, what options are left available to the owner of the property?
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Troster. By no means am I in any way an expert on remediation, so I'll speak in generalities here. But with any designated heritage property, should an issue arise where there needs to be work done to the building to accommodate it, the process would be to apply to this committee to make alterations to the building if needed. So if there were alterations required to do any of the remediation, then, and it was a designated structure, then that would come to this committee for their consideration and ultimately council. That's not to say that remediation always requires the demolition of the building, but if there were alterations, that would be the process.
Okay. And so just to clarify, the potential for contamination under the building does not have an impact on the city or on this committee's consideration about whether a building should or should not be designated heritage property.
The staff recommendation that's in front of you uses 0906, the evaluation criteria for designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act to evaluate whether we think it has cultural heritage value. Heritage staff believe it meets 5 of the 9 criteria, and we think it warrants designation. So we are concerned with the cultural heritage value aspect of it. We do, when we work with property owners, we do take into consideration any other information they provide to us. We haven't received any at this point.
So if a property is designated as a heritage property, and let's say contamination is so terrible, the owner decides it has to be demolished, there's nothing they can do. So they can always come back here to ask for this, correct?
That's correct. The property owner can come to this committee to request alterations or demolition of a property.
So it doesn't really limit what they could do to remediate if necessary.
Again, there's a process for the owner to go through to request alterations or demolition of a designated property.
Okay, thank you.
But there is an additional process when it is designated.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions? Yes, because we haven't moved on to comments, so you definitely can. Councillor Troster. I do see actually that Member Quinn has raised her hand for a question of staff.
Sorry, mine is a comment, so I'll retract it and hold off. Sorry about
Okay.
that.
Okay, so I think that there are no more questions for Mr. Pollowin. Now we can move to comments.
Thank you, everybody.
Sure.
This is a bittersweet application to see come up. I mean, as you saw in the photos of this building with the beautiful sign for the Orange Gallery, they have now, their lease has ended. They have now been evicted from that building. And there was certainly a lot of community uproar when the news came out that the gallery would not be allowed to stay in this space. And so I think there was some hope in the community that a heritage designation could prove as a disincentive to remove this beloved gallery from this beloved space. Just to be very clear with staff, I just wanted to get on the record. Does the city have any tool at its disposal to force a landlord to continue the lease for any particular tenant?
Under the Ontario Heritage Act, we do not regulate the use of a building. So of course, any use for a heritage building is a good use, but we cannot require a specific use to be maintained or anything like that.
Okay, so I just wanted to acknowledge the community grief around losing this gallery space in the context of a ton of redevelopment in Somerset Ward, in the downtown core, where we're losing art spaces. And I've been to weddings in this space. I've been to so many art shows that is so incredibly valued. And the way that that particular tenant used the space really highlighted its architectural value. But as you said, we're completely limited in the tools we have to preserve these kinds of spaces where there is a private landlord involved. And quite apart from the gallery, it's a wonderful part of neighborhood history, and I'm really pleased to be able to support the application. Based on answers from a variety of staff, I'm pretty confident that should there be contamination under the building, the owner still has options. So I'm very comfortable moving forward with this designation, and I want to thank staff for working so hard on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Troster. Member Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was also very pleased to see this building come before us today for heritage designation, and I think both staff and the extensive railway history knowledge provided by Mr. Jeans clearly demonstrates the significance of this building. To Mr. Pollowin's point, I think that the environmental issues, those sorts of reports, this committee will be able to entertain those when and should a development proposal for this site come before us. I don't think it should in any way deter us today from supporting the staff recommendation for heritage designation. Staff has clearly demonstrated that it meets the criteria to do so, so I will be supporting that recommendation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Quinn. I appreciate those comments and I concur with them. I think that the proper course is to ensure that any development application that comes through is then tied to alterations. I think that that's the typical process. We're dealing with the Heritage Act, of course. So it might not be germane to be dealing with the environmental remediations through this process. And I'm also satisfied that staff in good faith reached out to the applicant to extend the process. So my understanding was that this item was originally, according to the report, to come to committee in October, but there was a bit of delay to work with the applicant, with the property owner. So I think that that's important to keep in mind. For those reasons, I will also be supporting this report. So are there any other comments or questions? Seeing none, is the report carried? Carried, thank you. So this report will be submitted to council on January 24th for consideration. The final substantive item before us is designation of the Westboro Masonic Temple at 430 Churchill Avenue North under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There is a staff presentation.
Good afternoon. Good morning. Wow, long meeting. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. So this presentation is about the designation, proposed designation of 430 Churchill Avenue North, the Westboro Masonic Temple. And next slide, please. So just to give a little bit of neighborhood context, this property is located near the corner of Byron and Churchill Avenue North, just sort of before Churchill Avenue North descends towards Richmond Road. So it's a red brick, two-story building, constructed in 1924. And next slide, please. So just to give a little bit of an overview of the property's cultural heritage value, this building is a representative example of a purpose-built Masonic temple, and it features architectural influences from the Edwardian Classicist and Beaux-Arts architectural styles. So constructed in 1924, it has a symmetrical design. It features some simple classical features and also some integrated Masonic symbols throughout the building, largely in stones. That's things like the letter G, the compass and square, etc. And then also references to the two original lodges who actually founded this building. So this building is directly associated with the growth of both Freemasonry in Ottawa as well as fraternal organizations more generally. As the suburbs of Ottawa expanded in the early 20th century, new branches of the Masons and also other fraternal organizations were established, and they kind of upgraded from meeting in private homes and church basements to often their own buildings, such as this. It also reflects the work of notable architectural firm Richards and Abra, which was previously referenced in our earlier presentation about 415 Kenwood. And next slide, please. In addition, this property is a landmark building in Westboro, so it has a fairly prominent location near the corner of Byron and Byron and Churchill, as mentioned before, and it's historically linked to its surroundings. It was located sort of strategically, both near the commercial core on Richmond as well as the former streetcar line, and it strongly supports the historical character of Westboro. And next slide, please. And just to give a very brief overview of some of the property's heritage attributes, notably it's clad in red brick, and as mentioned before, it features a very symmetrical front facade. It has a parapet at the top of the second story, as well as some stone inserts with various different Masonic referencing details, as well as a cornice above that second story. These are fleshed out a little bit more fully in the Statement of Cultural Heritage Value that is attached to the designation here. And just a note on consultation as well. We did present to the board of directors of the Westboro Masonic Association, kind of gave them an overview of what the designation would look like, what their requirements are, et cetera. And the ward counselor is also aware of this designation. So that concludes my presentation. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for the presentation. We did receive correspondence from the Westboro Community Association as well as Heritage Ottawa, and we do have David Jeans registered to speak.
Yeah, you've certainly hit a number of my favorite buildings today. And I do live in the neighborhood and have for 45 years. This is definitely a landmark, as has been mentioned, both approaching it uphill on Churchill from Westboro and approaching it from the east along Byron, it really stands out. It's actually on the boundary between Westboro and Highland Park, so it contributes to both communities. And as I mentioned earlier, the architects Richards and Abra were both residents of Highland Park. So it's another example of their contribution both to the local architecture as well as to the architecture of the whole Ottawa Valley. It has been a presence in the neighborhood, initially built by two Masonic lodges, Ionic and Acacia. But Professor Bruce Elliott informed me that by 2005, it was actually the home to 5 different Masonic lodges. So very important in that era. My great-great-grandfather was a stonemason, so I have some sympathy there as well. But I do finally want to mention that it is on the walking tour of Westboro and Highland Park that Professor Bruce Elliott and I give, and it has participated a number of times in Doors Open. So certainly I support this designation.
Thank you so much for that delegation. I don't see any questions for you, so thank you, Mr. Jeans. Are there any questions to staff? And Member Madigan has raised his hand.
Great report. Again, I fully support the designation of this building. Similar to my comments about the Bible House, this is almost like its own little jewel and something that I've missed. And it's one of the benefits of being a member of this committee to get exposed to additional buildings in Ottawa that have significance. One small thing, I think the detailing of the arches over the doors should merit more comment. I think it's Florentine style. I think it's what they're nominally called. I think they're used on this building, but they're somewhat rare, but very joyful detail on that building. But thank you for the report.
Thank you so much for those comments. Are there any other questions or comments to staff? Seeing none, is the report carried? Carried, thank you. So this report will be submitted to council on January 24th for consideration. And thank you so much to staff for all the hard work. 10 applications before us and many designations. We appreciate the hard work that staff undertakes on behalf of the city. Having completed the substantive elements of the agenda, the next item is in-camera items, which we have none. There is an information previously distributed report concerning amendments to the Ontario Heritage Act proposed by Bill 139, the Less Red Tape, More Common Sense Act 2023, that was circulated to committee for its consideration. In terms of notices of motions, are there any notices of motions? Seeing none. Are there any inquiries? Seeing none, is there any other business? There is no other business, so on adjournment, we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody. The next meeting of the committee is Tuesday, February 13th, 2024. Thank you.